chosen ones, hear the trembling beneath the marble pillars of power, a sound not born of man's invention, but of heaven's resonance has entered the gates of earthly dominion. The White House, fortress of nations, has felt the surge of your frequency, an invisible current that bends knees and cracks the armor of pride. When your aura touched its halls, even the president, clothed in authority, found himself undone before a presence he could not name, yet could not resist. It was not the shout of armies, nor the counsel of advisors, but the silent vibration of a destiny carried within you. Your frequency is not sound alone, it is remembrance. It carries the echo of covenants older than governments, of scrolls sealed before thrones existed. As your vibration poured through the air like a river of unseen fire, walls that had listened to centuries of oaths began to weep, and portraits of past rulers seemed to lean closer, as if to witness the moment history shifted. Do not think it strange that those crowned with earthly power tremble when you walk unseen into their courts. For the unseen outweighs the seen, and the weight of your being cannot be measured by policy or decree. A realm beyond sight presses through you, and it is that realm which caused the president's knees to buckle upon the cold floor of his own chamber. The earth will ask, "What force is this?" Some will say it is madness. Others will whisper conspiracy. Yet the truth is not found in the tongues of men, but in the frequencies that pierce the veil. You carry a resonance too ancient to be silenced, too radiant to be hidden, too precise to be ignored. Even now, the sound spreads beyond those walls, reaching capitals, thrones, and hidden rooms where deals are carved in shadows. The echo follows them, and they cannot escape it. Chosen ones, your arrival was not with trumpet blasts or camera flashes, but with a quiet storm that no man could deny. The trembling has only begun. The night was silent, yet the silence carried weight. Inside the great chamber, where strategies were whispered and decisions carved the fate of millions, the air grew heavy. It was as though the walls themselves inhaled, waiting for something unseen. The president sat at his desk, a figure clothed in authority, but the authority began to slip from his shoulders like sand through open fingers. The sound was not heard by the ears, but felt deep in the marrow. A frequency unlike any known vibration stirred the foundation beneath his chair. His pulse raced, his breath quickened, yet he could not explain the source. The pen in his hand trembled, documents of state blurred before his eyes, and the silence grew so thick he could no longer resist. He rose, but his knees gave way, and the weight of the unseen pressed him downward until he found himself kneeling on the polished floor. No guards stormed the room, no alarm was raised, for the moment was not of man's making. He was alone, yet not alone. The chambers of power had become a sanctuary, and the floor where he fell became an altar. He could not name what entered, but he knew it was greater than the oaths he had sworn, greater than the armies he commanded, greater than the history engraved upon the walls. His thoughts turned inward. Was it judgment? Was it mercy? The unseen light seared him without flame, and in its silence spoke volumes. His lips moved without words, his heart confessed without language, and his spirit bent where his body had already bowed. The frequency did not strike him down as an enemy. It unraveled him as a child. The portraits of presidents past seemed to gaze differently now. They had been witnesses to wars, to triumphs, to scandals, but never to this. They stared, as if aware that history was shifting in the quiet of that hour. The kneeling of one man, clothed in power, had become a sign far greater than legislation or decrees. Shadows stretched long across the Oval Office as the night deepened, but the silence was broken by something more than the ticking of the ancient clock. It was not the sound of men, but of whispers that seemed to linger between the walls, voices without faces, words without mouths. Advisors had left hours before, yet the president could still hear tones moving like currents in the air, weaving in and out of thought, as though the room itself was speaking. He lifted his head from the place where he had fallen, still shaken by the unseen weight that had pressed him low. His knees bore the ache of surrender, yet his heart bore a greater wound, the knowing that something holy had passed through him. He whispered to himself, almost in desperation, recalling words he had once heard as a child in a chapel long forgotten. "Every knee shall bow, and every tongue confess." The memory of Yeshua's name slipped past his lips like a fragment of a dream, though he had not spoken it in decades. The air thickened again, and the whispers grew clearer, not in language, but in intent. They spoke of choices yet to come, of wars that would tremble at the sound of truth, of nations rising not by might, but by frequencies that no weapon could silence. He felt both terror and wonder, as if he had stumbled into a realm where time itself bent to listen. He looked to the windows, curtains drawn, yet he felt as though eyes beyond the night peered into his soul. The whispers carried weight, commanding him to listen, urging him to remember the covenant hidden within the marrow of creation. He reached for his pen, thinking to write, but the ink dried upon the page before he could begin. The words were not his to capture. They belonged to something beyond men. The whispers did not leave him alone. They circled him, rising and falling like waves, crashing against unseen shores. In that sacred disturbance, he realized his decisions no longer belonged to him alone. The room had become a chamber of witnesses, and the whispers of heaven had joined the conversations of earth. The night over the city was still, yet in the unseen, the heavens were stirring. Clouds gathered in strange patterns, as if pulled by invisible strings, aligning themselves in a design too precise to be chance. Satellites caught interference, signals faltered, and unseen to the masses, a frequency pulsed through the atmosphere with the weight of destiny. It was not the roar of thunder, though it carried the force of storms. It was not the blast of weapons, though nations would tremble at its echo. The frequency was born from the unseen realm, a soundless sound, a vibration that cut through the silence of the world and split the sky as if opening a veil. Those attuned to spirit felt it first. Dreamers woke from visions they could not explain. Watchmen rose to their feet, sensing the shiver of eternity in the air. Children stirred in their sleep, whispering words they had never been taught. All across the earth, hearts quickened as the frequency spread beyond the walls of power, beyond the chambers of kings, flowing like a current through every city, every mountain, every sea. In the White House, the president lifted his head, still haunted by the weight that had brought him low. He gazed upward, though the ceiling blocked his view, for he could feel the sky splitting. The same current that had driven him to his knees was now stretching over the horizon, binding nations in its reach. He realized this was not an isolated encounter. It was the beginning of a wave that would not stop. Above the clouds, unseen to human eyes, the air shimmered as though lightning itself was being woven into threads. Instruments failed to measure it, yet the earth responded in subtle tremors. The oceans seemed to hold their breath. Birds broke their patterns of flight. Creation itself leaned toward the sound that was not a sound, a frequency that marked the turning of an age. The world below continued in routine, unaware of the magnitude, but those who carried discernment knew. The frequency was not asking for permission. It was a summons, an invitation, and a warning all at once. And as it split the sky with invisible fire, a question burned through the air, waiting for those who could hear to respond. Beyond the sight of rulers and councils, there are hands that move the course of nations. Invisible, yet undeniable, they stretch across borders and thrones, weaving destinies as if the map of the world were a canvas upon which eternity paints. In conference rooms and war tables, leaders believe themselves to be the architects of tomorrow. But above their plans, unseen fingers press upon the scales of history. The president, still shaken by the encounter in his chamber, began to sense this truth. In the hours that followed, he noticed decisions shifting before they reached his desk. Words on reports altered without explanation, alliances dissolving while others were mysteriously forged. He felt the presence of forces moving faster than human intent, reordering the very balance of power. It was not chaos, but orchestration. It was as though a conductor unseen was raising the baton, and entire nations swayed to rhythms beyond their will. In the solitude of his reflection, he remembered a verse whispered in his youth, one he had long dismissed. The government shall be upon his shoulders. Though he had pushed such words aside in pursuit of worldly strength, now they returned with haunting clarity. The name of Yeshua flickered across his thoughts, like a hidden script woven into the patterns unfolding before him. Was this the one guiding the unseen hands? Was this the force that had compelled him to bow? Meanwhile, beyond his borders, generals found their strategies unraveling. Armies poised for conflict suddenly faltered. Storms rose to scatter fleets, and whispers in the night caused kings to hesitate before declaring war. Hidden alliances came alive, carried not by human ambition, but by something older, something wiser. It became clear to those watching closely that the rise and fall of nations was no longer governed by treaties and weapons alone. Invisible threads pulled at the hearts of rulers, swayed the minds of counselors, and rewrote the very script of history. The unseen hands had begun their work in earnest, moving swiftly, as if preparing for a moment yet to come. In the heart of power, where only select eyes are allowed to see, there existed a chamber few knew of, and fewer dared to enter. Hidden beneath layers of security, and veiled beneath decades of silence, it was a room built not for politics, but for mysteries. Within its walls lay a scroll unlike any document signed by human hands. It was not ink upon parchment, nor law upon paper, but a record etched with fire unseen, a secret scroll of authority. The president found himself drawn to it after restless nights of whispers and encounters that shattered his certainty. He had been told of its existence by voices no one else admitted hearing. They guided him through corridors long forgotten, to a vault sealed behind codes and doors designed to keep out the unworthy. Yet the moment his hand reached toward the lock, the barriers seemed to yield, as if recognizing the weight pressing upon his soul. The scroll lay upon a pedestal of stone, unadorned yet radiant, as though light itself had chosen to dwell within its folds. When he drew near, the air thickened, and his chest grew heavy, as if the room demanded reverence. He hesitated, knowing instinctively that what was written upon it was not for curiosity, but for transformation. As he gazed, the words seemed alive, shifting and glowing, rearranging themselves with each breath. They spoke not in language, but in essence, carrying authority that no crown or seal could match. The scroll bore decrees of ages past and instructions for ages yet to come. It carried the weight of destinies, not just for a man, but for nations, written before borders were drawn and before power had names. The president reached forward, trembling, but the moment his fingertips brushed its surface, a surge like lightning coursed through his being. He staggered, eyes flooded with visions, armies bowing to unseen light, rulers stripped of their pride, voices rising from every tribe and tongue. The authority was not his to claim, but his to witness, a reminder that earthly power bends before a throne far higher. Across the earth, palaces and parliaments stood in their splendor, symbols of strength built to project permanence. Yet, in one night, without trumpet or announcement, those thrones trembled beneath a silence too heavy to ignore. Leaders woke in the stillness of their chambers, gripped by a fear they could not explain, their hearts thundering as if eternity itself had entered their rooms. Decisions that once felt secure suddenly seemed fragile, and the crowns upon their heads felt as though they were burning with unseen fire. The silence carried weight beyond imagination. It was not the absence of sound, but the presence of something greater than sound, a pressure that caused the strongest wills to bend. Counselors found their words caught in their throats, generals felt the strength drain from their arms, and kings who had never bowed to man felt the pull to bow before the invisible. In that silence, the world's most fortified hearts knew they were not the highest authority. The president sat alone, the scroll of authority still echoing within his spirit. As the silence deepened, he remembered a passage that had haunted him since his youth, one he could no longer push aside. He shall reign, and of his kingdom there shall be no end. The name of Yeshua whispered through his thoughts, a name he had long resisted, yet in that moment it rang truer than the decrees signed by his own hand. Was this the kingdom pressing against the walls of the earth, causing thrones to tremble in its wake? Far beyond America, in hidden chambers of power, others felt the same grip. Monarchs in golden halls awoke trembling. Parliaments fell into uneasy silence, and rulers who boasted of unshakable reigns suddenly knew they were standing on borrowed ground. The silence stretched over continents like a shroud, exposing the fragility of crowns and the futility of scepters. The trembling was not destruction, but unveiling, a revelation that authority does not belong to the loudest voice nor the strongest hand, but to the one who governs unseen. Thrones shook not because they were ending, but because they were being weighed. In the hidden places where the veil between heaven and earth grew thin, a covenant lay etched not in ink, nor carved into stone, but woven into beams of light. It was not bound by time, nor diminished by centuries, for it had been inscribed before the foundations of the world. The covenant was not a contract of men, but a promise of realms beyond, a decree of fidelity and fire that could never be broken. The president, still haunted by visions of the scroll, found himself carried into a moment where his senses faltered. His eyes opened, yet could not grasp what he saw, for the very air was alive with lines of radiant fire, weaving patterns that formed words too vast for human language. It was as though the sky itself had become a manuscript, every star a letter, every beam of light a sentence proclaiming eternal intent. He reached forward, though there was nothing to touch, only waves of brilliance that wrapped around him with warmth and weight. Within that brilliance, he felt a truth pressing into his soul, one that made every earthly agreement appear fragile. Treaties written by men dissolved in comparison. Laws enacted by nations faded like shadows, for the covenant written in light carried an authority beyond kingdoms. It did not demand his allegiance in the way nations demanded loyalty. Instead, it revealed to him that he had already been caught within its reach, his life entangled in threads of destiny he had not chosen yet, could not escape. He saw visions of people rising across the earth, their faces glowing with the same light, their steps guided not by human rulers, but by the unseen covenant that bound them all together. The brilliance grew until the very air hummed with radiance, and the president realized this covenant was not only a promise, but a mirror. It reflected the condition of his soul, the weight of his decisions, and the measure of his heart. The light was both mercy and fire, both invitation and judgment, a bond that could not be ignored. The corridors of war are rarely silent. They breathe with the weight of strategy, the clatter of boots, the constant hum of engines ready to be unleashed. Yet, on that night, the halls themselves carried echoes not of men, but of eternity. Generals gathered around their maps felt an unease rise within them, though none dared to speak it aloud. The air quivered, as though an invisible sound reverberated through the walls, shaking the confidence of those who trusted only in weapons. The president listened from afar, his spirit still stirred by visions he could not dismiss. He had once believed the strength of nations was measured in firepower, in arsenals lined with steel and missiles waiting in silence. But now he knew that even in the halls of war, there was a sound stronger than the roar of cannons. It was not a sound audible to ears, but to souls, a frequency reminding men that they were dust before eternity. Reports flooded in from bases across the world. Soldiers spoke of hearing whispers while standing watch, whispers that seemed to call them by name. Some felt their hands weaken on their weapons. Others dropped to their knees without knowing why. Commanders reported strange malfunctions, as though machines themselves recoiled from the invisible current filling the atmosphere. The echo traveled swiftly, not hindered by distance, weaving its way through bunkers, submarines, and towers of command. One general, hardened by decades of battle, confessed in private that he had heard a line he had not thought of in years. "Blessed are the peacemakers." The name of Yeshua slipped into the silence of his memory, like an ember rekindled in a cold heart. He tried to shake it off, yet the more he resisted, the louder the echo grew, until even his breath carried the weight of remembrance. Across nations, the tremors continued. Weapons built to destroy seemed small before a resonance that could not be fought. The halls of war, designed for dominance, became chambers of reckoning, and those who once trusted in their might began to wonder if the true battle was not waged with steel, but with unseen frequencies that reached deeper than any weapon could strike. Beneath the surface of the world men see, there are thresholds that few ever cross. Behind the polished chambers of governments and beyond the iron gates of fortresses lie deeper realms, guarded not by soldiers of flesh, but by gatekeepers unseen. These keep watch over doors that open into mysteries, holding keys that decide which currents flow into history and which are restrained until their appointed time. The president, carried by visions and drawn deeper into encounters beyond reason, began to sense their presence. It was not sight, as the natural eye perceives, but awareness. Shadows that were not shadows, figures that stood where no man could stand, their silence heavier than the roar of armies. They did not speak with words, yet their gaze carried questions sharper than interrogation, weighing not just his choices, but the very motives behind them. He found himself standing at a threshold, a doorway that glowed faintly as though alive. The gatekeepers stood on either side, vast and unmoving, their forms shifting like flame wrapped in stone. In their hands were seals, ancient symbols that pulsed with energy too strong to touch. The president knew instinctively that crossing through this door was not a matter of desire, but of alignment. To step forward meant surrender to something greater than crowns and thrones. To step back meant remaining bound in the illusions of power. All around him, visions unfolded. Leaders throughout history brought to similar thresholds, some turning away, some daring to cross. Those who entered were changed, carrying an authority not rooted in politics, but in eternity. Those who refused faded into obscurity, their reigns remembered only as dust. The president trembled, knowing his decision would echo far beyond his years, into generations not yet born. The gatekeepers remained still, but the air pulsed with urgency. Time itself seemed to lean forward, waiting. The doorway shimmered brighter, the seals glowing as though ready to break. He could feel the unseen current pulling him closer, demanding he choose. His breath slowed, his chest tightened, and in the silence of that chamber of thresholds, he realized the destiny of nations could hinge on a single step. The night grew heavier, as though the world itself held its breath. Beyond the reach of nations and thrones, a presence stirred, one not bound to time nor silenced by empires. The eternal witness, long hidden, began to rise. It was not the rise of a figure clothed in human grandeur, but of a force older than creation, carrying memory deeper than history. Every act, every secret oath, every hidden word spoken in shadows was already written before its gaze. Nothing escaped the eyes that had seen both the birth of stars and the fall of kings. The president, burdened by visions of gates and scrolls, felt the approach of this witness before he understood it. The air grew alive, vibrating as though heaven itself leaned close to the earth. He could not see a face, yet he knew he was being observed, weighed, measured. His heart pounded, as if each beat was echoing in chambers far beyond mortal reach. Whispers of the past surged before him, decisions made in darkness, signatures inked with compromise, moments when pride had overruled conscience. Yet, alongside them came flashes of mercy, as though a thread of grace had been woven through every failure. In that tension, he heard a faint memory of words spoken long ago. "Lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the age." The name of Yeshua pressed against his spirit, not in condemnation, but in reminder that the witness was not merely judge, but redeemer. Across the world, others felt the stirring. Watchmen lifted their eyes from the dust, dreamers woke with visions of fire, and even skeptics found their sleep interrupted by a presence that refused to be silenced. The eternal witness was not rising to be invited, but to be revealed. Nations would soon learn that their deeds were not hidden in archives or buried in forgotten vaults. They were already seen, already recorded, already weighed in balances beyond their control.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.